go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to our March webinar, The Art of Growing Food, presented by Ellen Ecker Ogden. The Lake County Master Gardeners Association is dedicated to gardening education and helping others grow. Our free programs are made possible through our annual plant sale that's coming up in May and our garden walk that is coming up in June. More information on those will be up shortly on our website and sent out through a constant contact. These events also fund our grants and scholarships. Please check out our website, join our mailing list if you're not already on it, or find out how you can become a master gardener. We have a lot of fun and we would love to have you. Here are a few of our upcoming events. April 15th, we have Growing Vegetables in Small Spaces. That's also a webinar. We have our very own Susan Radovich on May 8th. That is presenting the Night Shift, Moon Gardens and Nocturnal Pollinators. And on June 12th, we have Nikki Wachowski from Porter County Extension, and she is doing disease prevention and diagnosis. And again, if you're interested in learning more, check out our website. A few reminders, today's webinar is being recorded. Participants are to be muted and keep your video turned off. Please submit questions in the Q&A section. I believe it's at the bottom of your screen, but you might have to check if you're on different devices. Ellen Ecker Ogden is a renowned food and garden writer, celebrated for her expertise in kitchen garden design and heirloom vegetables. She co-founded the Cook's Garden seed catalog, which introduced gardeners to exceptional European and American heirloom varieties. Ellen has authored several books, including The Complete Kitchen Garden and The New Heirloom Garden, blending her passion for gardening, cooking, and design. With a background in fine arts and culinary training under renowned chefs like Marcella Hazen, she has contributed to numerous national publications and appeared on programs like PBS's Victory Garden. Ellen continues to inspire gardeners and cooks through her lectures, classes, and writings. And we are so excited to have you here with us tonight. Thank you so much, Ellen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think you, oh, here you are.
I'm unmuted now.
Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm delighted that so many of you are here considering the storm, and hopefully we can get through the program. I'm so impressed. I didn't realize that you do this once a month. You must be just, your heads must just be full of information. And I understand CL is going to be your next speaker, and she's a wonderful speaker. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Let me just see if I can get my view set up now. Speaker, gallery, nope. Okay, sorry. I always get a little confused here in the beginning. Welcome. I'm going to just start right in sharing because we only have a limited amount of time. So let me just see if I can get in here, and we'll get started. Is that good? Can everybody see that all right?
Yep, you're good.
Great. So I want to also say thank you so much to all the master gardeners in Indiana, but also to Jeannie, who has been the one who has been pursuing me. She's called me, she's emailed me, she's reminded me, she's put a lot of effort into this. And so thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. Today's talk is about the art of growing food. Now, if we were in person, I'd ask you to, how many of you grow food? And I imagine a lot of hands would go up. You know, growing food has come back in style, so to speak. It went out of style. Maybe some of you have been growing food for a long time. I think there's nothing nicer. I grow flowers and I grow food, but if I had to choose one over the other, I would definitely grow food. There's just nothing like it. But you know, there's a lot of critters that do eat our gardens, and it seems to be a little bit more work sometimes than flower gardens. So the reason I want to share the art of growing food is because I feel if you can make it fun and beautiful, it will really kind of transform your experience. So without further ado, I'm going to just give you a little background about who I am and where I live. I'm in Vermont. This is the mountain behind my house, the Equinox Mountain with Equinox Pond in front. And this is pretty much what it looks like right now. We still have a little snow covering, and there's just beautiful icy water in the pond. Come summer, everything will turn green and nice. But I'm located in a valley that's between the Taconic Range and the Green Mountain Range in Vermont. And we're not getting tornadoes, but we do get probably similar zones and weather to you. This is what my garden looks like pretty much right now. It's just getting ready to be planted. I have started turning the soil under, but I know we're going to get more snow before the month's end and maybe into April. But this is what it looks like for me right now. So it's really a blank canvas. Anything goes at this time of year, and I'm really excited to get started. And this is a New Yorker cartoon. I don't know if this is how you get, but once I get going, there's no stopping me. Plants are just all I can think about. Every time I drive past a nursery, I say, let me just stop in and see if maybe they have some more pansies, or just see what kind of new things they may have. And I promise I won't buy anything, but then of course the back of the station wagon is full before long. And so I really try and hold back a little bit. But once you are bitten by that garden bug, it's pretty hard to stop. And I say, why stop? Just keep going and having fun. And so I wanted to just sort of step back a little bit further into my background and how I got started gardening. I have to admit that I was not a gardener. I didn't grow up in a gardening family. I went to art school. My husband was the gardener, and his family was from Vermont, and that's how I happened to come to Vermont. And he wanted to have an organic garden and sell produce to the chefs. And I was an art major. I started a design company right out of college and was making quilted vests and quilted jackets and working with beautiful fabrics. And I wanted nothing to do with the garden. To me, it just looked like work and lots of dirt and soil and mud. And I just said, take your things off before you come in the house and scrub up good. I wanted nothing to do with it, but I did love all the fresh produce that came from the garden. And one of the ways that my husband decided that we could support ourselves was with a farm stand. And we called it the Cook's Garden because I happen to love to cook and he loved to garden. So we thought having it called the Cook's Garden made a lot of sense. And unfortunately, in Vermont, in our small town, we have a year-round population of about 1,500 people. And so it wasn't really a great way to support ourselves. But we were happy, but we didn't really make much money, but we sure did eat well. But one of the things that we learned is that if we could be offering some things that were a little different than what most of our customers could get at the local supermarket, that we had the advantage. And so as the cook, I would come up with recipes for our customers to try different things. And one of our customers brought us a little seed packet of salad green from Italy called arugula. And now this is back in 1980, and we didn't know what arugula was, but as soon as we grew it and started selling it at the farm stand, people clamored to come to our farm stand. They loved that Italian green. And so we found some other European salad greens that we could offer. And before long, we were ordering them, and we started a little seed catalog called the Cook's Garden. So that's just a little background of how I happened to get here. But as the cook of the Cook's Garden, my job, luckily I didn't have to work in the garden or be in the garden except to go out and taste test. And since we were really specializing in our seed catalog with lettuce and salad greens, because being in Vermont, we're zone 4 and sort of borderline 5 where I live now. But salad greens could survive most of the frost, which we had just about every month of the year. It was so cold in our valley. And I would go out into the garden and I would taste the salad greens, and then I would write about them, because in our catalog, we didn't have color photographs like these beautiful pictures I'm showing you now. We only had written descriptions. So I needed to come up with ways to describe the flavor for things like mosh, which is this little rosette green here, or tatsoi, which is this little Japanese green here, which has a little bit of a bite, and some of these other salad greens. And I ended up loving salad greens, but writing about them all the time was a little hard. But I could come up with a vocabulary of flavor to describe things like this claytonia, the little round shaped leaf, which is actually a wild green. It actually grows in swamps in some places in the United States, but it has a tiny little white flower in the center, and you can see how pretty it looks in a salad. And it's very high in vitamin C, so it has a lovely light lemony flavor. And then the troutback lettuce in the back behind the claytonia, you can see that, and you probably grow that in your own garden. And that's a wonderful old heirloom variety called Forellenschuss. And somewhere along the knot line, somebody started to name it troutback because it looks a little bit like a fish. And then there's the Cheeriola chicory, the one behind the claytonia, and you can see that's kind of bitter. But each one of these greens has a very distinct flavor, and so as the cook, I was able to get out of being a gardener by actually writing the descriptions and coming up with recipes for the seed catalog. The problem I had was with the chicories, the radicchio that would take 6 months to grow, and some of the other Beyond Elise and some of the other gorgeous chicories that we managed to grow, but they're very time consuming and they're kind of complicated. Some of the Whitliff chicories we had to force in the basement all winter, and then they'd come up in the spring. But I couldn't find any recipes for ways to cook them that really satisfied my curiosity about chicory. And so I decided that after trying to grow chicories and coming up with recipes, that perhaps it was time that I learned some proper chicory recipes. And I told my husband it was time for me to go to cooking school in Italy. And so where would one go to cooking school in Italy but with Marcella Hazan? And those of you who know her cookbooks, she wrote 9 cookbooks all about very classic, authentic Italian food. And it was the perfect place to go to learn about chicory because it was in the fall, and that's when chicory was all through the markets in the Rialto markets in Venice, where the class was held. And so I was able to come home with a couple of recipes for chicory. And then my husband said, well, boy, that was successful. Where do you want to go next year? I'm feeling very generous. And I said, well, I'd heard about this school called the Ballymaloe School in Shanagary, Ireland, where they have beautiful herb gardens. And so I signed up to go to Shanagary the following year and arrived at this gorgeous, gorgeous farm, a lovely farm in County Cork in Ireland, where the gardens were just magnificent. And one of the things we got to do in the cooking school was to go out and harvest our herbs, and then we would come into a great big kitchen and cook and then share a meal. And I found this experience of going out in the garden and harvesting the herbs really piqued my interest in terms of being a gardener. Maybe it was the way that this garden opened up all of my senses, walking through that green gate with the birds chirping, or the smell of the herbs or the boxwood, or standing up on a little platform looking down on this garden. I could see that this was an exceptional garden, and I realized that if I could make growing food in a vegetable garden beautiful and fun and aromatic and really heighten all of my senses, then I really wanted to become a gardener. So I was here for a week and I really didn't want to leave. And I called home and I said, you know what? I think if you really want me to come back from Ireland, which I'm threatening not to do, you've got to give me a little space to have my own garden so I can really understand how to design a kitchen garden that has all the elements of this beautiful garden at the Ballymaloe School. I met with a little bit of resistance, but we had 2 young children, and so I did have to go home eventually. And so I realized that I needed to learn how to work with design. Having been at art school and understanding fabrics and knowing how to draw and understanding how things fit together, I really probably should have gone to horticulture school or design school at this point, but instead I just started to look at pictures. I devoured all the horticulture magazines, the garden design magazines, Better Homes and Gardens, and found as many books as I could on garden design. And I found this photograph it was a garden designed by Rosemary Veary, who's an English garden designer. And I knew as soon as I saw this that there are elements in this garden that I could use on a small scale, because clearly this is not a garden that I would put in on our little country farm in Vermont. But there are elements here that I have used over and over again as I continue to do garden design. And I've been doing garden design now for 25 years. So I'm going to share with you in this lecture some of these elements that I call my 6 steps to garden design. And I think all of you have a handout that that lays out what these are, and we're going to go step by step. But just starting with this beautiful photograph, I want to show you the first thing is setting up focal points. Notice that this white bench is at the very end of this alley. And if there wasn't a white bench there, you might not walk as far. You might just go maybe to this halfway point and then turn around and say, oh yeah, lots of trees. But notice even the trees are really pretty. They have, instead of round, they're square, which sets up a very linear geometric pattern in this design. And then notice in the white here, this white is part of the theme of the white benches, and then these white tutors here, which aren't growing anything. They're just simply ornamental. And many vegetable gardens are a little boring or ho-hum because everything grows horizontal, low to the ground. So when you can add a little height, it gives the garden a little drama. Notice this beautiful greenhouse, which of course I covet. And then just little elements like this square here, this cute little square. Well, you know, this could just been planted with straight rows, which is how most people plant a vegetable garden. But instead, Rosemary decided to divide it into triangles and put a little low-growing germander or low-growing boxwood or something green along the edges that really creates the structure and the style. So you know, good gardeners can really teach you a lot about design if you just take a look and see what elements are happening in them. So back home in Vermont, I started to look around at vegetable gardens, and this was my neighbor Carl's garden. And, you know, he was very proud of his garden. His little deck looks out over this garden. And I looked at this garden and I thought, you know, it has all the elements of the Rosemary Veary garden. It has a gate, it has a focal point, which is the Buddha under the tree. It has nicely mulched paths that are not in straight rows. They sort of go off in a diagonal, and then the wildflowers in the background bring the pollinators. But really where I want to take you to today in terms of your own inspiration for a vegetable garden, and this may either be for your garden or for a garden that you're designing for somebody else, is a garden that looks like this. This garden has intrigue and texture and color, and it combines flowers with vegetables, and it has so much going for it, and it's about the same size as Carl's garden. But if you were to choose one over the other, I would say I'd prefer to have this garden. It's not ordinary, it's what I call extraordinary. And actually it's a little bit weedy and crowded as well, but we don't need to worry about that because I don't mind that part of gardening. But looking at the brochure that was a handout, I think that was sent to you, and if you haven't downloaded it, you can do it after this class. We're going to go through each one of these steps and how do you get to that ordinary into extraordinary garden. Starting with a site, looking at garden paths, garden beds, boundaries, plant materials, and then adding your own personal touches. So it was easy for me to get out graph paper and pencil and eraser and rulers, but it wasn't so easy for me to learn how to use these tools. But once you get used to it, you can just use each of the little squares in the graph paper and pretend it's a foot. And maybe some of you have already done this kind of design, but really most of my designs just start from doodling on paper, just rough sketches. And then I'll take it to graph paper and start laying it out and figuring out if this is going to fit into a space or not. So I really recommend everybody start with a design on paper first. It's much easier. And then you take the paper design and then transfer that out into the garden. And I do teach this in a different class, garden design. and how to take it from paper to soil. But the most important thing is really thinking about your whole landscape as a whole, instead of breaking it into, this is my flower garden, and this is my vegetable garden, and this is my herb garden, and this is where I grow my peonies or my rhubarb, or however you want to do it, to just think about how it all works together as a whole. And in my garden classes, I often teach big and small. Think about as if you were a bird flying high and looking down into your landscape and seeing how everything connects, drawing the house and the driveway, and making sure you know which direction the four cardinal directions are: east, west, north, and south. And then where's the water, where's the shade, where are the immovable things like the stones, and then zooming in on where you want to put your garden design. So step number one is design, but where do ideas come from? How do you get started? How are you inspired to come up with a beautiful garden design like this? Well, for me, not having any experience in gardening and not really wanting to be a gardener, but suddenly being thrust into this role of being a garden designer because my husband agreed to give me a little plot that I needed to fill, I decided to do some research, and I started looking back into the history of gardens and what were the very first original kitchen gardens or documented kitchen gardens, because of course the first kitchen garden was Adam and Eve, but the first documented kitchen gardens go back to 1500 BC, and the Persia gardens, which Persia is no longer Persia, but they call them the paradise gardens. And this is where gardens and life happened together. This is where poetry was read and music was played, and love was made, and children got to run through nature and go in and out of the garden. And many of these early paradise gardens were depicted as a four-square design, because the four squares represented the four cardinal directions: east, west, north, and south. But also there was often water running through them, because water represents the four sacred liquids of life, because gardening was all about food. It wasn't just about pleasure, but it was about survival. And so honoring the space was as important as what was growing in the space. And the four cardinal directions, and then the four sacred liquids of life would be honey, wine, water, and milk. And then fast forward here to the medieval times, when most of the gardens, the beautiful gardens, were held in the confines of monasteries, where they would grow the oats for the animals, and they would grow medicinal herbs and flowers, and make tinctures and fruit, and everything that would provide sustenance for the people, and it became a refuge. And many of these gardens were also very geometric, based on that four square within that plot. And even though this is an engraving, it shows you the more or less design. But when you go to some of the European monasteries that are still standing, or ones that have been rebuilt based on old monasteries, that you'll see many of them are very geometric, and they're based on that four square concept. So that was something that started to percolate along in my mind when I was coming up with designs. And then of course looking at the beautiful gardens in the Renaissance, at the Garden of Versailles and the Chateau de Villandry, and the four square pattern is repeated over and over in these gardens. This is the German cross, which I think is this one right here. And these are all cabbages: red cabbage and green cabbage, and then inside is flowers. So it's a wonderful combination of having the flowers and the vegetables in one spot. I love these little maze gardens here, but this four square is interpreted in many different ways in this gorgeous garden design. And then fast forward to the I guess it's the 1400, the 1500s. I'm not exactly sure of my history at this point, but Colonial Williamsburg. When I was visiting Colonial Williamsburg, I was like, wow, even these four squares have continued through history. And somehow they sort of, we lost that track when we came up with the Victory Garden designs, everything in long straight rows. But going back to four square design is not only beautiful, but it's very productive, because it follows a four square rotation, which is based on following the crops, the legume crop, which is the peas and the beans, which are setting nitrogen into the soil that will then go into where the root crops have been growing. And the root crops have been taking all the nitrogen out of the soil. And then the roots go where the fruits and flowers were, and the fruits and flowers go to the leafy greens, and the leafy greens then move to the legumes. So you can see it's called a four square rotation. So every year you're changing what goes into each one of those four squares. And that way you're building the soil and you're keeping the plants healthy, and you're not planting the same thing in the same spot. So, history, when you look back on history, there's many practical design elements that we can follow. And so this is my little garden that's based on that four square design that I have continued to use in most of my books and when I do garden design. So moving on, how do you take that design on paper and then take it to that next step? Well, step number 2 would be paths. Paths are very, very important. And sometimes people don't pay attention to paths, but think of a college campus and how they're carefully designed with paths, but usually the invisible path is the one that goes from the dorm to the cafeteria or to the library, and maybe it doesn't have a brick path that they follow, but in a good garden design, you should be able to have paths that really make sense. And again, this is the Colonial Williamsburg garden, and the combination of the brick path with the clamshell, I think is so nice. And this has the main path, which would be this east, west, north, south, and it has the smaller triangular beds that would then go to the sideways, and you can see they're based on crosses. But when I saw this garden, I thought, well, this is a beautiful garden, but it's missing one thing, and so I had to add it in my pictures here, which is that white bench at the end there to give it a focal point and draw you into that space, and hopefully you'll take some time to sit on that bench as well. I think these are both also from Colonial Williamsburg, the old brick and the gravel, and notice how those pathways are actually the main element of design, and the beds and the arbor are kind of auxiliary when you think about it. And so really creating paths that make sense, but also form the directions and the line and the structure that you're really looking for in your final design. This is a bench at Hollister House in Connecticut, and I love putting benches in my gardens. I have several benches in my own garden, and I often tell people that when they're designing a garden to design it around having a bench, because I believe every landscape has a sweet spot, someplace that you just want to sit down. And as gardeners, we're always so busy. Once you get through this tornado season and you start planting your garden, you're going to be off and running. But if you can take time every now and then just to sit on the bench and just appreciate the bird song and the sun shining and the music from the bees buzzing, I think it will really enhance your experience of having a garden. In paths, this is also my garden. I've changed the path from this bark mulch, which I used in the beginning, to gravel because I was having so much problems with water washing it out. But when I first started, this is the front entrance into the garden, and then the back entrance from the garden in from the other side. And demarking the entrance is very important. We'll talk a little bit about that when I do gates and fences. But notice how welcoming a nice garden path can be. And garden paths should probably be about 4 feet wide, so you can get in with a wheelbarrow, or you can walk side by side with your friend. And then there's things called auxiliary paths, which are narrower that you'll use for stepping inside the garden. But think of some kind of a texture that you'd really like that will really bring out the color of the garden. Notice how that slate bluestone really accents the blue-green of the foliage, and the hay on the right-hand side is very easy just to scrape up and put on the compost pile, and then maybe design the garden with a slightly different path if you want to. So really give some thought to the design element that a path can bring. It's not just a functional element, it's a design element as well. This is an example of the auxiliary path going through the garden. You as master gardeners, you know, you don't want to compact that soil with your foot. So having a pathway where you can step through and it won't disturb the plants is very important. I love this path. It's really overgrown and it's really weedy, but at least it shows you more or less how to get into the garden. So, you know, even though I've been showing you some sort of perfect paths, they don't have to be perfect. They can just give an element of surprise and design and get you through the garden. And I don't think this garden, well, this garden was probably planned out fairly well on paper, but then it's been allowed to be overgrown. But since there was a good solid path to begin with, it has a certain structure. It's really kept the bones of the garden. Again, this is Hollister House, and what I love about their garden is they've allowed some of the plants to jump the borders there. That's a red shishu, which can be kind of invasive weed once it gets going. It's red perilla, I guess is another name for it, and the lamb's ear and the artemisia. And so you can see in the past, they're not spraying it with a weed killer to get rid of the weeds. They're actually allowing some of the plants to grow up in the path. And this is early spring, but by midsummer, it will look just wild and wonderful. And I've changed in my gardening attitude. When I first started, I loved a tidy garden, but now I actually like the wilder gardens, the ones that have structure, but are just a little bit more fun to walk through and find the unexpected things. So step number 3 are garden beds, and all gardens are a form of autobiography. Robert Dash, an artist, painter, and you know what you choose for garden beds is very important, and it will really establish the style and the design of your garden. And so one of the things I've noticed is that many people like the raised bed gardens, and they're very easy to put together. They're very structurally, you can put 6 beds in a small space and it makes sense to line them all up right next to each other. But oftentimes when you have a raised bed, and it can look a little bit like this in the winter, which I call the graveyard garden. You don't really know what's under that soil with those little mounds. And so if you have what I call a graveyard garden, it's okay. You can change the design a little bit so it's a little more fun, so that things aren't just lined up straight, or you can soften the edges a little bit with some plants or put some height in that garden. There's lots of variations, but if you can try and think outside the box is what I like to say, and figure out how to set those little boxes up in a slightly different configuration, then it will give it more interest. I have various designs in my books. Well, I love the Chanticleer gardens. If you've ever been to Pennsylvania, and one of the things they do is they grow their own willow, and then they make these wattle fences. And to me, that's the perfect raised bed garden, is to have something very old English looking like a wattle fence. But they don't last forever, but they sure do look nice. So if you happen to have a source of willow, I'd see if you can weave something together that looks like that. Again, another close-up picture of my garden. This is what I call the standard garden, which where I can walk in. You can see the stepping stones in the center where I can actually get in and plant what I need to plant or weed or do what I need to do. But it's a little bit more effort to keep the edges neat and tidy, but it's the way I prefer to garden. This is how my garden looked before I started planting it. This is a little garden that I did for a neighbor. And again, it's just your basic beds. They can look like the raised beds that we were looking at, but in winter, it's not going to look like the graveyard garden. They're going to look all flush to the ground. And this is a very traditional way of designing the garden. You can see the stepping stones in the center, and around the edges are grapes around the border. So there's lots of different ways to do your beds. And so, you know, just play around with different ideas and be aware of the various options that you have when you're designing your garden. Step number 4, boundaries. Remember that children, marriages, and flower gardens reflect the kind of care they get. Boundaries are really important because they keep deer out, they can keep rabbits out, they keep all the varmint, the little critters, not all of them, because many of them will just dig under the fence. But when I was in art school, one of the things that I learned was that we couldn't turn in a painting and say it was finished unless it had a picture frame. And so I've always thought of a beautiful fence around the garden, not as a way to keep things out, but a way to contain that beautiful space. And this garden wouldn't look half as charming as it does if it didn't have that white picket fence around the outside. And notice some of the elements we've been talking about here. There's a little height in the garden with these tutors and that focal point there. I love the way this gardener has a table for eating outdoors, al fresco, and then in her tool shed, she keeps her tools. Everything is right there and tidy. She also keeps a refrigerator in there for cold wine when she's serving dinner in the garden. And this is the garden which has the little auxiliary paths going through. But really, it's this white fence I want you to appreciate because it's really so pretty. This is another garden in Vermont, and this has the same picket fence, but it's unpainted, and it doesn't look as glamorous and as fancy. Again, the wonderful strawberry trellis as a focal point in the center, but this is what the garden looks like in August when everything is growing. Again, it's beautifully contains that wild garden, and if it didn't have that fence around the outside, it probably wouldn't look as beautiful, but it really is like a picture frame around the garden. Again, these are little raised beds like that picture I showed you of the smaller beds, but they're not really raised. They're sort of flush to the ground, so it makes it very easy to garden. Another example of a wonderful gate. This is a garden in New Hampshire, and they spent a whole year building those stone walls. They're 5 feet tall. And so deer don't jump over them, and they're all made with round stones that were collected off the property. And then they built that little hobbit house in the back, and then they asked me to design the garden in the center. But what I love is the little fence, the little gate that they put that really has the design that mimics those wonderful stones. So whatever kind of gate you can have to form the portal into that garden, and another example of a beautiful portal into the kitchen garden. And this is all lined up with a focal point in the center, and then the beds on either side, and then the chair. So you see a lot of these repeating elements that I keep talking about. But having a beautiful gate is like going into the closet in The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe when they were going into Narnia. It takes you into a space, and when you close that gate behind you, you can leave all your worries behind and just enter in that space and just kind of putter around as you please. So creating some wonderful gateway is a really nice way to start the design on your garden. This is looking into my garden. You saw the picture when I first laid it out. This is the arborvitae that has now been growing for 20 years. And I love to plant different things. This particular year I planted sunflowers. Sometimes I do Nicotiana. Sometimes I just do, I don't know, all kinds of different things. I just love to play up the entrance into the garden. This is my friend Annie's garden, and we all have garden mentors, and Annie was my garden mentor before I started gardening. She was a neighbor, and I love the way she's designed her arbors in the garden, and it's really just a piece of bent rebar, metal, and then she's taken some young saplings in the spring and cut them down and then twisted them around the rebar, and then she has the Grandpa Ott's Morning Glory going up and over and around. And one of the things I love most about Annie's garden is that she combines her flowers and her food together. So you can see there's the calendula next to the lettuce, next to the beans, next to this gypsophila, the poppies, and everything has a lovely texture and color and just a wonderful lightness to it. These are all raspberries. And the other thing that I love about Annie's garden, and she has a little tree house there. So when her kids were little, they would go out and play in the tree house. And to me, that's just such a wonderful idea to say, come on, let's go play in the garden. Instead of saying, I'm going to work in the garden, she could say to the kids, let's go play in the garden. So they have a whole different sense of what it feels like to be in the garden. And this is my friend Jan, and Jan was a true hoarder. She loved to collect things, and she ended up having a wonderful antique store in town because she loved collecting things, and most of her things ended up in her garden. Some of these things, I think, like she gave me her beehive when she moved, and various elements here just kind of dispersed. But what I most love is that it made her smile when she drove into her driveway. This was what she saw, and she'd jump out of her little car and then just start playing in the garden, and always had a smile on her face. So just, nothing is too sacred not to put in your garden, and just have fun and smile, and you know how it feels to smile. I think so often I walk around the yard sort of, and oh, I have this to do, I have this to do, and my shoulders get kind of hunched up and I'm leaning over. But when we smile, our shoulders naturally go down. And so find things that you love that you can put in the garden that will make you smile and that will make other people smile as well. So step number 4, seeds and plants. And, so often as gardeners, this is where we start, because the seed catalogs arrive in January and our seed orders go in January, but we haven't even worked on our design yet. And we haven't thought about our garden paths, and we haven't thought about our garden beds, but we have our seed orders. So let's just sort of step back a little bit and try and do some of those other things first. But seeds and plants are the heart and soul of our gardens, and this is why we garden. So taking a look at some of my favorites, I wanted to share mesclun. Now, back in 1980, when we started growing arugula, mesclun was also something that we started to introduce. And again, it wasn't something that was widely known. In fact, when we would knock on a chef's door and bring him his vegetables that he ordered, and we'd say, we have some wonderful mesclun, and he'd look at us like we were trying to sell him some contraband from the 60s. But mesclun really is miscellaneous greens. That's what it means. It's what peasants would harvest naturally all over the country. So arugula is a wild green that's been domesticated, and a lot of the chicories are wild greens that have been domesticated. And mesclun really just means miscellaneous greens. So when you buy a packet of mesclun, you're getting lettuce, you're getting arugula, you're getting chervil, claytonia, mosh, all kinds of things that grow at different rates. And one of the beautiful things about mesclun is you can grow a lot of greens in a small space. You just sow a row, and once it's ready to harvest, you water it and it will come back again. And some of the slower growing things will thrive, and some of the things that grow fast, like arugula, will die back. So it's a great green to grow in the spring, and the first thing to go into the garden. Basil. Everybody grows sweet Genovese basil. Like, I know this because when we had the seed catalog, every single seed order, and of course I'm exaggerating a little bit, but most of the seed orders started with sweet Genovese basil. I think a garden without sweet Genovese basil and tomatoes doesn't feel like a garden at all. And I wrote a little book about basil for Garden Way, now called Story Publications. I'm sure they've sold 100,000 copies by now. But I learned when writing that book that there are over 85 different kinds of basil. There's probably even more than that, but those are all the ones that I could track down. And you can grow the sweet Genovese, or the opal basil, or the purple ruffles basil, or the fine green, which is a tiny little green, which is so aromatic. It's what they use for true Italian pesto, but the leaves are so small, you're going to need 10 Italian grandmothers to help you harvest it. There's cinnamon basil, lime basil, lemon basil, Thai basil, holy basil, and most of them all grow very easily from seed. So it's not something you need to buy at a garden center. All you need is a seed packet or a friend that's been saving seeds. All kinds of herbs. I love all culinary herbs, all fragrant herbs. They're easy to grow. They thrive on neglect. They thrive in bad soil, and they're so satisfying. So again, trying to grow any kind of basil and herbs. And lettuce is a favorite of mine. I've been growing lettuce. I grow way more lettuce than I can possibly eat. But it's good thing because I have a lot of bunny rabbits too. So we share the lettuce garden, but lettuce is so beautiful. Um, really stretch yourself when you're growing lettuce. Maybe do an 80-20 rule this year when you're growing your garden, which is 80% 20, 80% tried and true that you've always grown, and maybe 20% something new and different. And there's a wonderful seed catalog called Wild Garden Seeds where I get all of my lettuce and salad greens from. But something like this, this is actually a very familiar lettuce. You might have grown this. It's an iceberg lettuce, but it's a red iceberg lettuce. It's an old heirloom variety, and growing a beautiful lettuce like this, it just is such a reminder that food is so beautiful. And whenever I look at this, I often wish that a bride would carry lettuce down the aisle instead of a bunch of roses, because I think it's just as pretty. And endive and chicories and that whole Mediterranean family are so great in the garden, especially in the heat of summer when lettuce doesn't germinate and won't grow. The chicories will thrive in that kind of weather. And try some old heirloom varieties, such as a lemon cucumber. They grow about the size of a small baseball, and they're little prickly. Kids don't really like touching them, but once you smooth off all those prickles and chop it up, it looks a little bit like a lemon. And edible flowers. I love edible flowers: nasturtium, borage, chive, the cygnet, the French marigold, the pansies. There's so many wonderful edible flowers that you can grow in your garden. Egyptian walking onions. These are really fun. They're top setting onion, and they're called a walking onion because if you leave them in the garden, they're also called lazy wife garden because if you leave them in your garden, they'll fall over because they're heavy on the top, and then they'll reseed themselves, and they'll soon fill your whole garden up with onions. But as far as I'm concerned, I can't have too many onions. Something like Moon and Stars watermelon. Again, why grow the same things you can buy in the store? Why not try something really unusual? And these are exceptional watermelons. They're very tasty. Yes, they have seeds, but there's nothing wrong with seeds in a watermelon. But look how fun they are. If you have grandkids, how much fun they would have with each one of these melons, aptly named Moon and Stars. The cranberry beans, which are a shucking bean, again, most of us don't grow shucking beans because they're so time consuming, but it's really good to be reminded of what our ancestors had to do when they were growing food for sustenance, not just for beauty and fun. And that husk cherry, I don't know how many of you have grown that tomatillo, the golden Cape gooseberry. There's lots of different names for it, and it tastes like pineapple and butterscotch, and you're never going to find it in the grocery store, but you will have great luck with it in your garden because it's very easy to grow and it's very prolific. Broccoli rabe. Most of you have probably seen this in the store, and maybe you love broccoli rabe. I happen to adore it. It's very bitter, but I happen to like bitter greens, and it's a little easier to grow than the broccoli heads, which take a long time. Broccoli rabe grows in about half the time. Or the Felderkraut cabbage, if you love making sauerkraut. This is an old German variety that is very sweet and tender, and it makes the best sauerkraut. So trying to find the right variety for the right recipe is important. Now, in 2020, I published a book called The New Heirloom Garden, which was the last book. It came out actually in 2021. And I was really intrigued by the idea that I've been growing these heirlooms, and I wanted other people to understand what is an heirloom. What is an heirloom seed? What is the difference between open pollinated seed and hybrid seed? And so I started with this question: what is an heirloom? Well, heir means inheritance, and loom means tool. And an heirloom garden is a garden where you're growing crops that have been grown for centuries from the same seed that's been saved over and over. And why would you do this when seed catalogs offer us so much variety? Well, there's flavor. we've lost a lot of flavor with the hybrid varieties. A lot of hybrids are bred for disease resistance or productivity or longer, stronger stems for flowers, or a lot of different reasons. But some of the old heirloom varieties, such as the old tomatoes or the old eggplants and peppers, have wonderful flavor. And in the book, I interviewed different people who I really respected, who were in the garden world. Maybe Roz Creasy, who wrote the book, the edible, what did she write? I can't remember, lots of books. But she said, if I don't like the taste, I'm not going to eat it. There's a wide difference between varieties. And when we had our farm stand, we would have a lot of different varieties that people could taste test. And we did find that heirlooms definitely came out on top. And genetic diversity, such an important topic. Extinction is a term we often hear attributed to wild things, but not to agriculture. But we've lost 90% of our crop diversity, says Will Bonsall of the Seed Savers at Scatter Seed Project. And so being able to save seeds and especially the older varieties is really important. And fragrance in old flowers.
Hello there.
How many times have you bent down to smell a flower and it has no, so fragrance is so important with heirloom varieties. Preserving history, here today, gone tomorrow. Unless we preserve seeds, they will disappear, says William Roy Reaver. And he discovered old heirloom varieties in his grandfather's freezer. That he was a doctor and he was treating one of his patients for treatment for seeds. And so he brought these seeds out of the freezer and started growing them and started saving the seeds. And they would have been lost forever if he hadn't done that. So there's many reasons to grow heirlooms. But unfortunately, many of the seed catalogs want us to buy their seeds, and they're not going to be necessarily promoting heirlooms. Luckily, a lot are these days, the Seed Savers catalog and many others as well. But something like burpees, they really would love for us to keep buying seeds from them. But really, if you start becoming a seed saver and growing open pollinated seeds are free. You're growing your peas. Let's say it's a Lincoln variety, which is an old heirloom variety. If you save just a few pods, you're going to have enough seeds to plant another garden next year, versus the hybrid seeds are not genetically true to their parent plants, and so they're either not going to germinate or they're not going to grow the same plant. And there's different things that hybrids do. Sometimes they grow some kind of mutation, but an open pollinated will be true to its parent plant. And seeds are beautiful. Look at the variety. When you open a seed packet, just pour it into your hand and look at those seeds and really inspect them. All of these came from one seed packet, one plant, the chocolate runner, which is a wonderful scarlet runner type of bean. And so I just became fascinated by the way seeds are created in the garden every day, yet we're not really paying attention to saving seeds. And I bet many of you grow this particular plant in your garden, but you don't let it grow to seed like this. And once this is budding up now, and it's going to have little white flowers, and then it will turn into, does anybody know? I know you're all muted, so I can't play that game with you, but it looks like this when it goes to seed. This is another picture. It's lettuce seed. It's and this is growing in the Chanticleer gardens. I'm sorry, my cat is getting in the way here. It's growing in the Chanticleer gardens in Pennsylvania, and they decided to plant bedfuls of lettuce, and people would walk through here and they go, what is this unusual plant? I've never seen it before. Well, everybody grows lettuce in their garden, but they don't usually let it go to seed. You pull it before it gets to this thing, and you throw it on the compost and you start another plant. But if you just let a few of these plants grow, you'll have thousands of seed, and you'll never have to buy another seed packet again. And furthermore, it's quite beautiful, I think. So just start thinking about the seeds that you're growing in your garden this year that you can save, and watching that wonderful plant go from seed to seed, because that's really the nature nature of most plants is to produce seed, and they're also gorgeous. Now, seed saving is really quite easy if you start with certain plant families. This is the legume family, the soybeans and the peas and the beans, and just save a few pods and mark them and label them and put them away. But it's very important to be saving seeds and to be aware that we're losing so many of our old varieties. During the 20th century, there were 5,000 varieties of apples, and today there are less than 800. And that was when I wrote my book 5 years ago, and I think they're probably down to 400 because everybody loves Honeycrisp and some of these sweet eating apples. But way back in the 100 years ago, 150 years ago, there were special apples for applesauce and for pies. These happen to be green apples from my heirloom tree that's in my backyard that's been here for 150 years, and it continues to produce an amazing number of green apples, but they really are not good for eating, and a lot of them have blemishes and wormholes, but they make great pie. They're very tart. And be thinking about some of the old fruits like the elderberry and the lady apple and the sour cherry. So going back to that idea of growing 80% tried and true, 20% new and different. Just be looking for things that you don't commonly see in the market and get excited about growing them. Quince and currants. Purple fruits and vegetables are the highest in antioxidants and nutrition. They are actually the original plant form. That purple carrot, which is 400 times more vitamin A in a cooked purple carrot than there is in an orange carrot. And they were originally plants that were not grown for their roots. They were grown for their seeds, and the seeds were used as seasoning. And then somebody dug them up, and they were purple and they were bitter, and nobody liked them. And then plant breeders got a hold of them and started turning them into orange and yellow and white. And same with tomatoes. The original tomato was a tiny little purple tomato that was very bitter and very high in lycopene, but it would make your mouth pucker. And so they took it into the breeding lab and started making all kinds of sweet, sweet, sweet tomatoes. And now hundreds of years later, that's what we crave. But really, when you go back to the purple and the bitter, those are the highest, most nutritious, dense foods you can grow. So Concord grapes and the Cocozil zucchini and the Bloomsdale spinach, again, all old heirlooms varieties that you can grow in your garden, but you can't necessarily find in the store. I love bringing up heirloom tomatoes because when we had the farm, we grew a lot of heirloom tomatoes, and we'd take them down to the farm stand and they'd have this horrible cat facing on them. And people said, "Oh my God, that's so ugly. You think you can sell that? You should throw that away." And then we'd cut it open and hand them a slice, and they go, "Oh my God, this is the most delicious tomato I ever had." And that's what's fun about the fact that heirloom tomatoes have become so popular, because we're so accepting of the way they look because we know that they're going to be delicious. So when you have friends over, take them down to see your tomatoes. I need everybody to come down to the garden to cheer on the tomatoes, and really celebrate the food that you're growing, because it is a lot of effort, but when you turn it into something fun and really beautiful, you get that much more enjoyment. And as master gardeners, you're really trying to inspire other people as well. So bringing personality to your garden is the final step here. An optimistic gardener is one who believes that whatever goes down must come up. Adding things to your garden that make you smile and make your guests smile and really get people excited about growing food. These are two examples from Longwood Garden. The little arbor made out of sunflowers for the kids to go out and have tea, or the birdhouse, having a focal point. Maybe it's a rustic twig trellis or a big gold statue that you got from I don't know where this gardener got that, but I love the way it's the focal point at the end of the garden, and this will soon fill up with plants and look a little bit better. And then maybe just using your plants as a wonderful ornamental element. I love the way these cabbages are all growing in a straight row, but they've all gone a little higgledy-piggledy. But this is a great example of companion planting with onions and beets, and really making the most of that space, and then growing the greens and things at a diagonal instead of just in a straight row. So really thinking beyond just the straight rows of gardening. This is Jan's garden as well, and she loved rabbits, and I loved all these collections. So don't be afraid if you have a passion for something. I happen to have a passion for toads and frogs, and I love little stone frogs all around my garden. I don't have quite as many as Jan has rabbits, but I just think there's so much fun, and of course kids love things like this. And the most important thing we can do right now is to inspire kids to enjoy being outside in nature. This is the Chanticleer garden, and they're funny structures, but again, it adds height and drama to that garden. So whatever you can do to add an artful element that really brings a little beauty into the mix of things is will really be make it more enjoyable for you and those who visit with you. So even the bird bath, dress up that bird bath. So remember to share what you love with others, because that's what you do best as master gardeners, and you have so much knowledge. And I hope that this has inspired you a little bit in your own vegetable garden, and also to bring some fun ideas to some community gardens, and to remember to play with your food in the garden and in the kitchen. Because there's only two things in life that money can't buy: true love and homegrown heirloom tomatoes. So thank you so much. I think I think I got it into an hour. These are my two books that are available in most bookstores and of course on Amazon, and you can follow me on Instagram. So I'm not sharing anymore. I'm open to questions. How's this